Racist cop pulls over black driver, stunned to discover he's the mayor. Following his arrest of a black man, a racist police officer pulls over another black man for no apparent reason. He discovers he has just. Samuel Jones, the city mayor, slapped his fingers frantically on the steering wheel. It had been a long day at City Hall, packed with consecutive meetings and urgent decisions. He was looking forward a calm evening at home when he neared the Maple and Oak crossroads, flashing blue and red lights. Lights pierced the twilight Samuel's heart. His first reaction was not haste or law-breaking. He eased his car to pull over securely and check his rear-view mirror, where he spotted the police cruiser parking behind him. The dirt crunching gently under his tires on the side of the road hummed the motor of the cruiser as the officer. Inside, ready to leave, Samuel inhaled deeply, his fingers lightly tightening the steering wheel a bit more. The officer, a burly man in his mid-30s, got out of the car and walked with a deliberate step. His uniform was. Samuel slid down his window and, perfectly pressed, his badge gleamed in the last of the light as the cop reached his. "Good evening, officer," Samuel said, his voice consistent. "Evening," the officer spoke sharply, slinking slightly toward the window. "Do you know why I pulled you over, Samuel Fred?" His brow. "I hadn't done anything wrong." The officer's eyes tightened as he stared into the car, his tone cold and dismissive. "All right, I'm going." Samuel handed out his license and registration paperwork, attempting to keep his cool and see what he needed. "Is there a specific reason you stopped me?" The officer examined the papers carefully with an attitude of suspicion. "I saw you were driving somewhat too near the center line. I'm just checking to make sure everything's in." Samuel looked at the vacant streets surrounding them and felt growing discomfort. "I cannot remember crossing." The officer didn't react right away. "The center line I've been following for years has never caused any problems." Rather, he tapped the papers against his hand and examined Samuel under a steely eye, asking where you were going home from. Samuel said, "It's been a long day. I just want to get back." The officer's attitude hardened. "You seem a bit too calmed down for someone who had been driving somewhat too near the center line." Samuel raised an eyebrow of uncertainty on his face. "I'm simply trying to follow your ask. I'm not sure why this is." The officer's tone grew more accusatory. "Okay, let's check if there is anything else suddenly becoming such an issue. We should be worried about getting out of the car." Samuel's heart started to race. "That absolutely required. I have not broken any laws." The officer's demeanor stays stern. "It is a normal process, just." Samuel unbuckled his seatbelt grudgingly and got out of the car. The officer started looking through. Samuel stared from the curb, his motions deliberate, yet laden with a clear sense of animosity mixed with frustration and anxiety. "Yet, I reassure you, the car the officer searched is not illegal." Whispering under his breath, we would watch minutes passed as the officer searched Samuel's automobile, observed a few passing people staring inquisitively, their faces changing from curiosity to. Eventually, the officer straightened up and turned to face Samuel, a smile playing on his lips. "Well, everything seems to be in order, but I still find your handling of this." Samuel tried to keep his voice cool. "I don't comprehend what's happening here. May I kindly go now?" The officer ignored the question. "You're not going anywhere until I'm happy. I have to verify your records." Samuel felt kn of anxiousness tighten in his gut. "I'm not sure why this is happening. I haven't done anything wrong." The officer's stare was relentless. "Just relax. I'll be back with your findings." The officer returned to his cruiser. Samuel waited by the roadside, his mind racing, and looked at. Seeing the time, he was already running late. What should have been a standard journey home had turned into a disturbing meeting that left Samuel feeling increasingly uncomfortable. When the police returned, Samuel took a. The night was setting in around them, and the peace of Cedarville was helping him to slow his racing thoughts. Deep breath appeared to contrast dramatically with the tension that had suddenly erupted. Samuel stood on the side of the road, the chill. The officer's cruiser was parked with its lights still flickering as nighttime air seeped through his coat. Samuel moved his weight from one foot to the other, trying to control his nervousness as pulsing blue glow covered the calm street. In check, Officer Reynolds was seated in his cruiser, the dashboard lights lighting his face as he spoke into the. Samuel's irritation grew as the minutes passed slowly. and looked at. About observing the few people stopping to see the situation develop, their reactions mixed with inquiry and worry, but none ventured near after what seemed like a lifetime. Reynolds came out of his cruiser and returned to Samuel with a clipboard, his expression fixed in a rigid manner. Frown and his eyes fixed Samuel with a disturbing intensity. "All right," Reynolds said, turning over the papers on the clipboard. "I will need to inspect Samuel's trunk." His patience was fraying already. "Informed you the car is not unlawful. This seems excessive." Reynolds's eyes narrowed their regular practice now. Samuel opened the trunk grudgingly, revealing a few grocery bags, and then lifted it inside. Reynolds peeked inside his inspection. A gym bag, nothing out of the norm. Then he felt something rather different. "Suspicion, everything else in here I should know about?" Reynolds inquired, his tone oozing with scorn. Samuel sighed. "Only groceries and personal stuff. May I just go home right now instead?" Of answering, Reynolds seemed to take his time, still examining the trunk with an air of authority. As though Samuel was looking for something to explain the stop, he observed, getting more and more irritated. "Reynolds, look, this has gone on long enough," Samuel stated. Behavior started to become more obtrusive. Rising, "I wonder why I am being treated this way. I have been nice and cooperative." Reynolds closed the trunk with a smack, turning to face Samuel with a haughtiness that, "Well, now that we're done with the car, I need to confirm your details." Samuel's eyes grew wide. "My knowledge, what specifically Reynolds is seeking for?" Didn't directly respond. Instead, he grabbed his phone. Samuel felt a knot of anxiety sink in as he started furiously typing, and the air between them cracked with tension. A few minutes later, Reynolds looked up from his phone, his face reflecting. Unreadable. "I will provide you a source for what?" Samuel inquired, incredulity in his voice. "I haven't broken any laws. Your record check returned some oddities." Reynolds claimed, his voice empty of pity. "Only as a precaution." Samuel tried to keep composure, but his irritation was evident from the differences I presented. "All the accurate information. Why is this happening?" Reynolds ignored Samuel's objection and started completing a citation. The procedure seemed to drag on, every minute stretching longer than Samuel had experienced, a mixture of wrath and powerlessness as he watched. Reynolds worked with a careful slowness. At last, he gave Samuel the citation. "Your attitude is still stern." "I disagree with Samuel's signing of this." Samuel looked at the document, his eyes straying over the legal jargons, a leg scrawl. "But good." Samuel signed the citation. Reynolds's expression stayed constant. "You will get a court date in the mail. Until then, you are free to go." Samuel took a long breath and tried to relax himself. "Thank you, I hope." Reynolds responded by turning on his heel and returning to his cruiser, therefore promptly fixing this problem. Samuel stepped back into his car, feeling a great weight of injustice settle over him. Samuel drove away, the evening's frost sinking into his bones. Glancing at the citation in his hands, he felt a mixture of rage. With resignation seething inside him, the calm evening he had expected was replaced by an uncomfortable meeting that left him wondering about the equity of the system he had always relied on. The journey to the Cedarville police station felt interminable. Samuel's mind spun with a disarray of ideas, his annoyance rising with every minute that went by. The city lights swirled above his, creating transient shadows. When he at last reached the precinct, he was greeted with the severe glow of fluorescent lights and the police officer's busy activity within. Samuel, still shackled, was directed inside Officer Reynolds's door, whose stern visage had not lightened since the traffic stop inside the precinct. The atmosphere was a far cry from the silence of the street. The noise of phones are ringing, the murmur of Samuel's heartbeat as he was guided by chatter, and the clatter of keyboards filled the room. "Why am I being handled like this?" From the front desk into the booking area, Samuel inquired, his voice strained. Reynolds not answered, instead pointing Samuel to a metal bench close by the booking. Samuel sat down, his hands still under control behind his back, and peered around the crowded officials and clerks, attempting to overlook staff members' occasional frowns and curious looks. A female cop with a facade of professionalism asked Reynolds what charge she was looking at. Samuel: "Suspicion of illegal activity. We are only processing him for now." The officer's eyebrows wrinkled. "Oh, illicit activities. For what variances on his record Reynolds claimed his tone to be contemptuous. Samuel Jones responded, "I'm the booking officer," her eyes softening with a hint of sympathy. The booking agent, Mayor of Cedarville, stopped her and moved from a professional to startled. "You're the Mayor?" Samuel nodded clearly frustrated. "Yes, but I'm not sure how that affects anything, but I need to know why." The booking officer turned to Reynolds, perplexity and worry obvious in her eyes. Why wasn't this information confirmed before bringing him in? Reynolds's face stiffened. "It was just a regular stop. We had to follow protocol." The booking officer sighed, obviously unhappy with the circumstances. She left Reynolds to make a call. Samuel could hear the murmur of, "So I will need to establish his identification and sort things out." The tension in the room was evident, and Samuel's irritation was evident through dialogue and the occasional clatter of papers. Mounted as he waited for minutes, the booking agent came back, carrying a small bundle of documents. "Verified your identity, Mr. Jones." Samuel's eyes narrowed. Thus the actions of Officer Reynolds were inappropriate. "So what happens now?" The booking officer sighed. "We will need to release you, and I will make sure that situation is reported as." Samuel stood up, his body tight, as the officer took off the handcuffs. Samuel felt the pain of the metal. Reynolds returned, his face a mix of defiance and aggravation. "You're free to use," still angry and incredulous. Samuel took a long breath, attempting to cool himself. "Go, you'll get a citation in the mail." "I want to know why this happened." "This was a misuse of authority." Reynolds' eyes stayed icy. "You'll have to address that with the department." Samuel turned on his heel and headed toward the exit. His irritation was clear in every stride as he left the precinct. He could hear the faint murmur of talks behind him. The buzz of activities carried on the evening uninterrupted. Samuel felt warm emotions, although the cool, clear air was a sharp contrast. Got into his car, his thoughts racing with the ramifications of what had just happened. The quiet evening he had longed for had been broken by an unfair meeting, leaving him with a great sense of betrayal and a developing. Samuel understood. He was determined to right the wrongs he had encountered. As he drove home, the lights of Cedarville burst past him. This event reflected more than just a routine traffic stop gone awry. It was a manifestation of more profound problems requiring. Though the way forward was unknown, one thing was clear: far from over the Cedarville police. In the low light of early evening, the Cedarville police precinct seemed huge and ominous. Still, it was still a throb with ACAC ITY as Samuel Jones sat in the little windowless room assigned. The fluorescent lights above create a harsh, sterile glow over the plain walls of the space for briefings and interviews. And wooden table. The door to the room creaked open. Detective Mitchell entered. He was a tall man in his early years, 50s, with graying hair and an austere manner. He nodded at Samuel before seated across from him. Face a mix of concern and wonder. "Mr. Jones," Mitchell started, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent. Samuel looked up, his annoyance. "I understand there has been a bit of a mix-up here, and I'm come to sort out things." Clearly, it wasn't just a mistake. "I stopped, searched, and arrested without." Officer Reynolds answered me straightforwardly about nothing. Mitchell nodded, understanding the weight of the "This is more than a basic procedural mistake. Based on the situation, we have been studying the reports and speaking with witnesses. There are major problems here." Since Mitchell mentioned, the door opened once more, and Officer Reynolds entered, his face with a mask of obstinate defiance. He looked at Samuel before settling next to Mitchell. The room's mood changed tight as Reynolds sank into his chair. Avoiding eye contact with Samuel, Mitchell peered at Reynolds, his face changing from professional to severe. "Officer Reynolds, could you clarify your behavior?" Reynolds changed. "I reluctantly pulled Mr. Jones over since he was driving too near the center line. I followed normal." Samuel interrupted, his voice rising. "Normal practice in conducting a search and reviewing his information was nice and obedient. There was no cause to escalate the matter in that manner." Mitchell's eyes went between Samuel and Reynolds. "You know, Officer Reynolds, that this goes beyond the traffic stop at that location and include claims of racial bias and misbehavior. We must know why you behaved as you did." Reynolds's face. "So I followed what I felt was required to guarantee that, should a problem arise with my techniques, then that's something the department will have to deal." Mitchell's gaze was unwavering. "We're Managing it now, Mr. Jones's identification was confirmed, and it is evident that his treatment was unnecessary. I need you to explain why you went with an arrest when Reynolds's expression stayed resolute, and there was no legal justification. Was performing my duties. If Mr. Jones had nothing to hide, then he wouldn't have been agitated. Samuel's frustration boiled over. I was unhappy since I was being treated unfairly. This is not only about me, but also about your treatment of Mitchell. Everyone raised a hand to indicate calm. Officer Reynolds, we will review suspended pending more investigation. Reynolds stood up, his face a mixture of wrath and defiance, then chose suitable disciplinary action. This is absurd. Mitchell's voice was firm, and I was merely following the guidelines. Regulations are designed to safeguard everyone, not to be used as a tool for prejudice and misbehavior. We will be doing a complete evaluation of your action tonight. When Reynolds exited the room, Samuel glanced at Mitchell, his annoyance subdued by a flicker of optimism. Mitchell's attitude softened slightly. We will investigate carefully. Your knowledge will help us to improve our protocols and guarantee that this does not happen to us. Samuel nodded to everyone else, expressing a mixture of exhaustion and relief. I value. Mitchell came up, offering a hand. We will do all we can to bring about actual change from this. Just thank you for your cooperation and patience. Samuel shook Mitchell's hand, feeling the weight of the evening's events gently rising as he left the precinct. The night air felt colder, a sharp contrast to the anxious environment. Though it had been disturbing inside, the experience, it had also clarified the problems requiring clarity. Samuel's thoughts on driving home were a flurry of emotions. The evening's events had shown serious defects in the system, but they had also offered a road ahead towards reform. Be difficult, but Samuel was resolved to see it through the haze as Cedarville passed by. Reminder of the work ahead and optimism for a better, more just future. The sun rose over the next morning. Cedarville's surprise friendliness stands in sharp contrast to the misery Samuel Jones had experienced the night before. The beautiful town hall has big windows reflecting the early light and a red brick front. Inside the environment, Samuel sensed more urgency mixed with the typical administrative bustle. Arrived in the town hall, his face wore a mask of resolve. The weight of his recent experience was heavy, but his driven to right the injustices and pursue significant transformation, he was met with his good morning, Mr. Assistant. Carla is a conscientious late-30s woman with a strong sense of organization and friendliness. Samuel grabbed the stack of documents Carla handed him. We have a full agenda today. How are you doing? Glancing at them momentarily, Carla, I'm handling. Let's get started. I wanted to address last night's. Carla nodded with obvious anxiety. I had set up a meeting with the city council and the police chief. Members, they are awaiting you. Samuel entered his office into a large room, filled with light and orderly arranged furniture. The space served as a haven from the turmoil outside, yet today it seemed like a battleground where a few minutes later Samuel entered the scene and important choices would be taken. Chief Anderson and other city council members were already gathered in a conference room that was set up. Chief Anderson, a seasoned speaker, had everyone sat ready for the debate with a big table in the middle. Officer with a calm but commanding attitude glanced up as Samuel arrived. Good morning, Chief, Samuel said, shaking hands with Anderson. Thank you for meeting with me on short notice. Chief Anderson nodded. Good morning, Mayor. We are. Samuel sat at the head of the table with his posture here to go over last night's events and forward direction. Straight, and his reaction to yesterday night's situation was somewhat alarming for Officer Reynolds. Were not just unjustified but also suggested a more general issue among our police force, Council Member Davis, a middle-aged man well known for his direct attitude, said. We have all seen the news. This is not only concerning one officer's misbehavior. Samuel nodded in agreement since it relates to structural problems that demand attention. Precisely, we must evaluate our policies and treat these problems holistically to solve them. Guarantee appropriate instruction and, most importantly, restore the confidence between the police and the community. Chief Anderson leaned forward with a serious attitude. We are dedicated to solve these issues that we have already begun to internal evaluation, but Samuel looked around the room, meeting the eyes, and we need your help to carry out long-lasting reforms. Of every council member, What kind of changes are we looking at, Chief Anderson? First, we must. This implies changing our disciplinary policies and making sure our personnel answer for their behavior. Guaranteeing openness in our handling of complaints calls for investments in training courses addressing problems of prejudice and enhanced community relations. Councilmember Garcia, a young lady known for promoting social justice, added we should also take into account establishing a civilian monitoring board. This board would guarantee that community issues are heard and adds still another degree of responsibility. Samuel nodded carefully. A civilian monitoring board may be a major advancement, providing Chief Anderson believed a community voice in supervising the police department's activities helps rebuild confidence. That kind of board would have to be carefully organized to guarantee justice and efficiency. We would need to clearly define its authority and obligations. Councilmember Davis turned at Samuel and asked, "How do we move?" Samuel moved forward with these improvements, pausing to collect his ideas. We will need to create a proposal stressing these improvements. We should also arrange public forums to obtain opinions from the community. It's vital that the people. Chief Anderson nodded. That's a smart way. Involving the people of Cedarville in this process will be essential to guarantee that these reforms are successful and garner widespread support. The conversation on specifics about debates on the specifics of the oversight board. The suggested reforms were generated around the extent of the training courses and the systems for guaranteeing responsibility in spite of obstacles clearly showed. Among those in attendance, Samuel sensed renewed hope for the path ahead as the conference drew to an end. Would be difficult, but the police chiefs and the municipal council members will to solve the problems was a vital first step. The transformation would be driven by community support and the commitment to serious reform required to establish confidence and make sure justice. Samuel departed the conference room. The weight of the events of the previous night balanced the sense of progress. The road towards reform was only starting to show. However, for the first time, there was a clear direction and a group effort to address the challenges head-on. As he moved through town hall's hallways, felt early morning sunshine on his face, a reminder of the fresh starts and the possibility for good change the trip ahead would demand, but Samuel was resolved to carry it through for the benefit of Cedarville and its community town halls. By the time Samuel Jones showed up for the public debate, the main auditorium was bursting with the vitality of local activists and community leaders gathered. Worried citizens to talk on the recent occurrences and Samuel could sense the general anxiety and expectation as suggested improvements to the police force proceeded. He moved among the throng toward the front of the auditorium, a sizable gap. High ceilings and rows of chairs running from the front to the rear, all facing a sizable makeshift stage allow the stage was furnished with a podium and a few chairs for the panelists. Chief Anderson, a representation from numerous city council members and the Civilian Oversight Board, and ZMB. Samuel inhaled deeply, getting ready for the evening, then stood up to face the sea of faces. The room silent as he started to talk, his voice combining elements of, "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know many of you are authority and sympathetic, very worried about the latest police incident and the consequent questions of confidence and the related. I would want to reassure you that we are committed to resolving these issues and take them very seriously." Samuel continued, "Tonight, we are here to debate the suggested improvements," and murmur of approbation permeated the audience. "Your opinions and ideas are very important since we want this process to be open and inclusive." Chief Anderson stood up to the microphone, his presence commanding attention. "We have discussed various important areas needing adjustment, including improvements to our disciplinary policies. Our objectives in officer training and the establishment of a civilian monitoring board are to guarantee that such events are handled correctly and that we restore the confidence between the law enforcement and the people." Crow gathered from the community displayed a mix of inquisitive, hopeful, but dubious faces. Once Chief Anderson concluded, the floor was open for public comments. One by one, people got up to express their views and experiences. The wide spectrum of voices reflected the community's intense involvement in the topic. First, I had a young woman named Lisa, well known for her activism, take the mic. Observed how skewed policies have affected our community. Hence, it is imperative that the civilian monitoring body have actual authority. This is not only a symbolic act, we must make sure the board can hold officials responsible. Samuel nodded in understanding her worries. Thank you, Lisa. We realize how important it is to ensure that the oversight board has great authority. We are working on clarifying its powers to guarantee it can really influence a middle-aged man called Tom who had spent decades living in Cedarville talked next. I have lived in this town my entire life, and this is the first time I have witnessed the community and the police unite like this. It's a step in the correct direction, but we must make sure the changes solve the relevant issues and are carried out successfully. Samuel addressed Tom's comment, and I value your point of view implementation as the core reasons of these problems. And we are dedicated to implementing these changes with responsibility and devotion over the evening different. Community members shared opinions ranging from support to condemnation. The frank and passionate conversation reflected the underlying problems as well as the optimism for real change. Samuel was struck as the forum developed by the recurrent themes in the comments: the need of openness, responsibility, and meaningful community involvement. The public's participation served as a potent reminder of the shared reform and justice. Toward the close of the forum, a local pastor, Reverend Johnson, talked with a cool, collected, and measured approach. Tone: we all want a safer and more just Cedarville. It's crucial that we tackle these improvements with unity and an eye toward knowing that real change takes time. Let's help each other and cooperate to improve this town. Space for everyone. Samuel had a flash of hope listening to Reverend Johnson. Sean Johnson's remarks that evening had been emotional and strong, but it was abundantly evident that the community was committed to alter the conversations, had given insightful analysis, and strengthened the group will to solve the current problem as the form. Samuel came down from the stage that evening feeling a mixture of relief and resolve. Evidence of the community's tenacity and commitment to justice. The work yet ahead would be difficult, but the success depended critically on the participation and encouragement of Cedarville's residents. Samuel turned back at the room, now humming the quiet hum of the changes, leaving the amphitheater. Following forum debates, the ideas developed the foundation for the necessary adjustments to restore confidence and guarantee. Though reform still had a long way to go, Samuel was determined to see it through. Felt a renewed sense of purpose and a closer connection to the chilly night air he was walking into. Samuel Jones had served the sun from a town barely above Cedarville. Strolled around the town hall following the same morning schedule, flavored with a fresh feeling of urgency for the public. Discussion from the previous evening had laid a clear road forward. Today marked the start of implementing those ideas. The office hummed with bustle as Carla was already at her desk, sifting through a stack of documents. "Good morning, Mr. Jones," Carla greeted him as he entered, her tone cheery, despite the early hour I had scheduled. Samuel nodded, listening to the most recent updates on the reform projects and a few police department reports. "Carla, let's go over everything. I want to make sure we're set to hit the ground running." From his desk early morning, Carla gave him a folder including the most recent versions of the reform ideas together with a list of important tasks. "This is the Civilian Oversight Board draft together with a suggested calendar for the..." Samuel went over the training courses the police department had handed over their first comments. Records documenting the comprehensive plans for the monitoring board and the training courses. The ideas suggested were thorough handling of numerous community issues from the forum. Nonetheless, he realized that execution would demand close supervision and dedication from all those engaged. "Let's begin by going over police comments," Samuel advised, looking at the papers. "I want to know their viewpoint before we go." Carla nodded, pressing a few buttons on her computer to access the pertinent reports. "Here's Chief's comments. Anderson and his group have expressed several questions over the suggested schedule and the training logistics programs." Samuel attentively considered the comments. The main issues were logistical ones, namely the viability of. While these were reasonable points, Samuel, the suggested training plans and the necessity of more resources begged questions. Resolved to maintain the momentum and noted Samuel's worries about placing the papers aside. "We will need to handle these problems, but not at the expense of our time frame. Let's set a meeting with Chief Anderson and the..." Carla Ned collecting notes. "I'll set that meeting for later this Training coordinators should help to figure out the specifics. Today, I will also create a statement to the police department addressing their issues with a Samuel-based strategy in mind. Ready for his meeting with Chief Anderson, he went over the main ideas of the reform suggestion and developed his answers to the police department's issues as he was touring the town hall. He felt a mix of excitement and resolution when the conference room was set up with a big table and Samuel came to discover Chief Anderson already sitting reading over some paperwork. The chief looked up as Samuel arrived, nodding in appreciation. "Good morning, Chief," Samuel stated, sitting across from him. "Thank you for meeting with me. I want to address the comments UPRO has given and talk about how we might go with." Chief Anderson nodded. "Good morning, Mayor. I value your eagerness to work on the reforms. We are dedicated to make these reforms successful through these challenges. Nonetheless, there are rather pragmatic reasons we..." Samuel agreed. "I know we should start with the issues regarding the training initiatives. What? Several problems with the suggested schedule." Chief Anderson reviews his notes and notes the main one is the availability of resources and trainers calls for a quite ambitious suggested agenda, which worries us about our ability to reach these targets without sacrificing the caliber of the instruction. Samuel leaned forward, thinking about the remarks of the leader. "Let us mix the urgency of these reforms with pragmatic limitations. Maybe we may change the timetable somewhat and give top priority on important areas of instruction. We can also investigate possibilities for extra materials." Chief Anderson's expression softened somewhat. "If needed, incorporating outside trainers might help us. Also need to make sure the training covers all facets of the suggested changes." Samuel nodded at. "Greed allows us to work on a revised timeline, including your comments, so that the training stays exactly." While Samuel and Chief Anderson worked through the specifics of the conversation, meticulous and efficient as it went, the training plan and the difficulties of running the civilian oversight board, the conversation was cooperative with both sides concentrated on developing sensible equal answers to Hans' problems. By the end of they had decided on a new schedule and a strategy to handle the resource issues Chief Anderson raised. Wider open, Samuel felt a sense of advancement. "Thanks you for your cooperation, Chief," Samuel stated as the meeting ended. "I think we're headed in the correct direction. Let's keep lines of contact open going ahead." Samuel's hand was shook by Chief Anderson. "I appreciate your understanding. We are dedicated to see these changes come through, and we'll do all we can to assist the process." As Samuel exited the conference, he sensed renewed determination. The road ahead was still difficult, but the group effort to solve problems and carry out the reforms was a. Samuel passed the busy activity of the town hall on his good stride forward, coming back to his office. A reminder of the community's involvement and support of reforms work was only getting started. However, the advancement achieved in the conference and the dedication of the police department and the community were. Samuel sat down at his desk and looked at the revised paperwork and action items scattered before him. The journey reform was far from finished, but with every stride Centerville was approaching a time defined by more. Though the obstacles were great, Samuel was resolved to follow a clear road forward and trust the trials. See it through for the good of the Centerville Police Department's training facilities, which benefits the entire community. Buzzing with activity as police assembled for the daily session, this August morning was exceptionally cool and the early sunshine poured through the windows, creating a brilliant glow over the training facilities space. Mixed with schools and useful exercise spaces, all meant to manage. Samuel Jones came to the institution with Carla and a few others in several facets of law enforcement training. Today was a big day for his staff members, starting a new extensive training program meant for. Samuel was keen to see the improvements in action and to guarantee that the problems underlined by the recent revisions were addressed. Inside the main training room, Chief Anderson was already at the level expected by the community. Whilst getting ready for the session, rows of chairs facing a big display screen, officials prepared the space. Were seated silently waiting for the session to start, the air filled with a concoction of. Samuel stepped to the front of the room where Chief Anderson greeted him with an awkward "Good morning, Mayor. We are ready to get going. Thank you for coming today." Samuel grinned, feeling a mix of eagerness and anxiety. "Good morning, Chief. I value the chance to see As the session started, the training, I am looking forward to watching how these new initiatives are carried out.
Chief.
Anderson presented the agenda for today's training, which will center community involvement, bias awareness, and updated disciplinary policies. Various guest speakers covering these subjects throughout ILY. Renowned bias training specialist Dr. Elena Martinez led the first session, starting with an interesting, attentive presentation on the impacts of unconscious bias on room policing was focused, and as Dr. Martinez detailed doable tactics for identifying and overcoming prejudices in. Samuel watched intently the officers' everyday encounters. Some seemed thoughtful and involved. Some were dubious about the material, but Samuel. After Dr. Martinez's session, there was a pause for which one hoped it would inspire significant thought and change. Samuel seized the chance to chat with some cops about their experiences of the training. Officer Collins, a middle-aged veteran with a gruff facade, thus far spoke. Since we have been doing things a certain way for a long time, it is honestly refreshing to see some new ideas being offered. Once so, it's definitely an adjustment. Samuel nodded, recognizing the difficulties of change. I appreciate your openness. These adjustments are aimed to improve our operations and rebuild trust. Your comments are therefore very important in ensuring. The next session, under the supervision of a local activist, Maya, concentrated on community involvement, and we are headed in the right path. Johnson offered her knowledge on good communication between law enforcement and The session featured role-playing exercises where police simulated managing several situations. Stressing empathy and attentive listening, the police seemed more involved during my visit. Actively engaging in the role-playing and posing questions, Samuel observed a good change in the energy of the room. Indication the participants were finding resonance in the training as the last session covered. Legal expert Thomas Reed clarified the updated disciplinary policies by explaining the presentation offered thorough illustrations of how the new policies for addressing complaints and guaranteeing responsibility handled the new policies would be followed, and what officials could anticipate about monitoring and repercussions by the end of. Samuel had a cautious optimism about the training. It had been rigorous and provocative, but it had also had. As the seminar came to an end, Samuel approached the officials to start insightful conversations and reflections. Samuel asked Chief Anderson how he felt the training went. Looking thoughtful generally, though the sessions were think it was fruitful as the officers had a lot of fresh material to process. Acquired, we will have to follow up with more instruction and help to guarantee these ideas are completely included into our everyday routines. Samuel nodded in agreement. I'm glad to see that we should keep the momentum rolling and keep supporting the cops as they change. To these modifications, once the officials left the training room, Samuel paused to consider the training day had. Though it was only the beginning of a more extensive process the dedication to reform would need, it was a major step forward. Must be maintained by constant supervision, Samuel left out community involvement and continuous training. The day's events had proved that although change was inevitable, the clean air sensation rejuvenating against his skin. Driving away from the training ground, he felt renewed. He might also challenge it as necessary. Though the road to reform was long and full with challenges, the advancement accomplished that day was great. Was a vital component of creating a better future for Cedarville. Samuel dedicated to seeing the project through, making sure the reforms and training will result in a more responsible and community-oriented police department. As the sun started to drop over Cedarville, Samuel considered the day's successes and the work remaining to be done. Though the path of reform was continuous, every step the municipality was toward a more fair and equitable future. The days after the new police training program started were full with expectation and wary hope. Cedarville community was keenly observing to see the changes after actively contributing in the debates and reforms. Concrete results of Samuel Jones's sense of responsibility as he got ready for the town evening hall meeting, in which he would give an update on the development and answer public questions from the town hall. Once more crowded with people whose faces reflected a mix of hope and mistrust, the big room was set up. Rows of chairs facing a stage where a panel of officials includes Samuel, Chief Anderson, and many city council members were eager to serve the neighborhood, and the mood was infused with urgency since the residents Samuel replaced him on the platform, looking around the room, awaiting specific proof of the changes implemented. Saw old faces from past conferences and fresh ones whose looks combined tiredness with excitement as his speech held the weight of the expectations of the community. Good evening, Setterville. Thank you for. We are here tonight to give an update on the latest revisions and to get your opinions on the changes that. Your participation has been very important for this process. We want to make sure we are headed in the correct direction. Chief Anderson came up next to Samuel, prepared to provide updates on the state of the police department over the past several weeks. We have instituted fresh training initiatives with an eye toward community involvement and prejudice awareness. Revised disciplinary policies. We are dedicated to ensure these reforms bring about significant transformation. The room was silent as. Following his quick briefing, the floor was up for public. Chief Anderson talked to the crowd, focused and serious. From the first speaker, Lisa, who had been outspoken in the last forum, the microphone, "I value the efforts." Lisa started her tone calm but tough. Yet, we must see consistent results. There is particular benchmarks or measurements we may review to assess the success of these changes, Ms. Samuel nodded at. Appreciating openness, Lisa, and we are working on defining precise benchmarks to assess the general effect of the reforms we implement and the success of the training initiatives. Schedule frequent releases of reports to let the community know about our development. While Lisa returned to her seat, Tom, the longtime resident who had before shown wary hope, stood up. And I'm happy to see the changes happening, but how can we guarantee that comments from the community will be received? Constant communication with the community keeps influencing the reform process, Samuel said. We are dedicated to keeping open lines of contact. We will keep holding frequent town hall meetings and send information via. Still, a major component of the reform process is community feedback via several avenues. Jordan, the next speaker, a young male, expressed concern regarding recent experiences he had with police personnel. Saw some encouraging developments, but occasionally I feel as though the cops don't really grasp, appreciate the community they serve. What actions are being done to solve this? Chief Anderson addressed Jordan's. We know that developing trust takes time. Our training courses are meant to solve these problems, and we constantly review and improve our methods. So, we support constant communication and feedback to enable us. The remarks were honest and reflective, yet they continued to balance praise with concern and recommendations. As the conference went on, it became evident from the various points of view and experiences of the community that although progress had been achieved, Reverend Johnson, who had spoken favorably at the last forum, still had to be worked upon. Presented a hopeful viewpoint. We have seen good progress, but let's keep cooperating to handle the changing lingering difficulties as a process. Hence, it's crucial that we stay united and concentrated on our mutual objectives. Samuel valued Reverend Johnson's words of inspiration. Thank you, Reverend. It is imperative that we remain dedicated to this process and help one another as we travel forward. As the meeting drew to an end, Samuel and Chief Anderson stopped to consider the evening's conversations. The community's involvement is evidence of their commitment to the reform process, and the quality of the comments they supplied was valuable and emphasized both the areas needing more work stepping out of the progress achieved and the town hall. Samuel saw a mix of gratification and resolve for the communities of response that had been thoughtful, full, and positive, underlining the need of ongoing openness and involvement. Although reform was a long road, the town's combined efforts were a strong tool for good change. Samuel departed the town hall. The quiet streets of Cedarville mirroring the peace following a night air was cold. Busy and significant evening. The task ahead would be demanding, but with the help and commitment of the Samuel in the community was sure Cedarville could keep developing toward a more fair and equal future. Samuel felt renewed sense of direction as he drove across the town. The road of reform was far from finished, but the action done was a step towards a better Cedarville, guided by the common dedication to justice and community. Disclaimer: this channel is in opposition to all forms of human rights violations, intolerance, bigotry, and discrimination. The narratives that are presented here are original works that were designed to encourage constructive dialogue, comprehension, and introspection. Respect for diversity and the preservation of human dignity are the guiding principles for the creation of all content.